Welcome to my teaching learning session of Introduction of Social Psychology. Today we start with another unit which is BPCC 132, which is Introduction to Social Psychology, and I am SINGH, your academic counselor for IGNOU for graduation courses. Now, speaking of social psychology, which has been elaborately studied now and researched in the late 1 to 2 decades, which is 10 to 2 years of life. Now, what is social psychology and is it really very important? Do we need a psychology which talks about society, social interaction of people, understanding one another in terms of being with people, without people, and in a group, or probably in an individual interaction with other people? So let's first understand what is the scientific definition or the operational definition of social psychology. Social psychology has been very widely been defined by many psychologists. One of the most famous is Carson, Fine, and Marcus, who states that social psychology is how we feel, think about, and behave towards people around us, and how we feel, how our feelings, thoughts, behaviors are influenced by those people in a social context. Remember, when we are talking about social psychology, the context, the situation, the place that you are standing, and the number of people, and lesser or more, or probably no one, or probably an implied source of thought of people, can also be something that helps you understand the social psychology. Now, there's another definition which, actually, to simplify this, is social psychology talks about how do you feel amongst people and without people. So, this presence of people can be implied or actually present, which is there could be people who are actually standing with you, which is 3, 4, and 5 in a group, or an interaction which is very individual interaction that impacts you. Also, a lot of times we need to study these in terms of presence. What is implied presence? A presence that you have been thinking of but not present in front of you. A person who's not there but virtually or thoughtfully in your mind, and that's how your interaction in that area, scenario, or context changes. I'm so sure that teenagers and early adults usually are very much impacted by an implied presence of others. Why did I say an implied presence of others? Because we usually are impacted by how do we want to talk to people, how do we want to behave, how do we feel when we imagine people watching us, imagine how people are going to judge me, see me in this context, am I being the center of attention? This is also something which is influencing you as in a social context by people, and these people are implied presence, they are not actually present at the moment. And all these processes of how do we see these interaction, how do they change, what is the influence, what kind of ways a group can be formed, what can be the causes, what could be the conflict and reasons, all of this is a part of social psychology, and it is scientifically studied today. When we say scientifically, it is equally as scientific as psychology as an experimental method was. So a lot of experiments have been conducted, and it is equally, researched upon with scientific methods used, which could be observations, it could be researching in terms of experimental method, and further diagnosed, and a proper series of steps have been devised for them, and we come up with a theory. And we begin with now the nature of social psychology. Why do we want to understand what is the nature? Like we studied in the initial part, that what was psychology? Psychology is a study of human mind, behaviors, mental processes, and its nature is social science and science like any other science of physics, chemistry, or probably something which is very scientific, has a approved disapproved thought. And social science is something which is associated to changing of your behaviors and thought and feeling by the presence of other people or the presence of a social condition. Similarly, there's a nature of social psychology also. That means it is also having features and facets to it, which is different as a branch of psychology. So it has its own features. Let's start with the nature. What is its nature and what are its characteristics? The first thing that we start with social psychology is it applies scientific method of study, and scientific method, as I said, it is scientific in nature. You should not be saying that social psychology is something which is completely dependent on social context, but it is something which is proved by methods. It can be proved as a, let's take an example. If you want to understand interpersonal interaction amongst teenagers, we will take a set of group, do devise some methods, we will take hypotheses, we will prove, disapprove those hypotheses using scientific methods and come up with a theory. So that is scientificology of social psychology. So first point is it is a scientific study. It applies systematic observations, description, measurement of those attributes. Like interpersonal is an attribute that I want to study in teenagers. So interpersonal attraction would be an attribute that will be studied scientifically with methods, scientific methods in a social context. Also, social psychological studies usually refer to data in a social context. You cannot pick up anything which is in absence of people or in absence of a social condition. So, like psychology, when we studied structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, that was in the absence of people and in the absence of social situation and context. So this is always going to include a social condition, a social interaction, an interpersonal interaction. It can also be two people or more people or a condition which you need to study. Now, social psychology studies have direct observation or experiment. We would not prefer something which is a telephonic survey. So surveys are something which can be taken, but not today's flimsy kind of surveys like telephonic, email. No, because the interaction is not viewed, the interaction is not understood, the interaction is not even studied in a social context but on a medium context, which would be incorrect. Also, such experiments and observations are carried out very carefully. The psychologists are very trained, and every detail is reported by the investigator, repeated and repeated to get it verified so that we come towards a holistic theory by the end of it. So, for the first point, by the nature, we understand that it's a scientific method, it uses scientific methods, and also that we come down using direct methods into it, which is observation, experimental method, which is one of the most famous methods of psychology, and come down to verification of it and then give out a theory. Now, coming to the second point that we talk about as social psychology is that it studies individuals' thought, feelings, and behaviors, but in between a social context or in between the presence of other people. So you study people's thinking, their reasoning, their feelings. This is always going to be a part of psychology. The way we people think, the way we want to think about it, feel about it, behave in varied condition will always be a core part of psychology. What differs in social psychology is that we are going to understand people feeling, thoughts, and actions, but in the presence of a social condition. This issue of social psychology includes individuals' thought, behaviors, and feelings. Also, when we talk about a social individual, we also talk about social cognition. Social cognition is how do we perceive people. So this will also study the cognition in a social construct. In activities, like while we interact with people, let's take two big examples here to understand that how social psychology is studying us. Let's take an example that you go for an interview today. Now, when we talk about interview going, when we speak about just psychology, it is going to be something in association of how are you going to perform? Will the pressure of others enable or disable your performance? But when we're talking about social psychology, we talk about the way that you take in the questions from the interviewer, and as an interviewee, you respect or relate it to other people's thought and feelings and then answer. So let's take an example as when we talk about teachers. Teachers in India cannot dress up explicitly and come down in the social condition. Why? That's a social cognition now. There are people who want to be flamboyantly dressed in a social condition of teaching, but maximum teachers prohibit it. They make sure that everything's decent the way they are perceived. Why? Because the profession, the condition, the context that we are working in requires such activities and such behaviors. So this is again a process when we talk about social cognition. Cognition is referred to as a manner in which people process information. So processing information in a social condition will involve social cognition refers to activities helping people understand and how do we perceive a person, how do we predict their behaviors, and after prediction, how does a social behavior comes into play. Like let's take an example, peer pressure is such a beautiful example of a social condition. So it becomes an example of social psychology. How? Like let's take an example. There are two people talking, and a third person goes by, and you comment or you tease the person. Now, their thoughts, feelings, and action will always change by the bullied. So whenever the bullied is present, the person who's getting bullied will always be cautious, will be very nervous, will feel anxious. So probably in the positive aspect, the person will be ready to attack equally, would be ready to comment back. So that is stating two major nature of psychology, social psychology. It's scientific in nature. It studies all the features of social psychology with scientific method. Second point, The individual, we also study in social psychology individuals' thoughts, feelings, and actions. So how do you think, how do you feel, leads to your behaviors are studied in social context equally, which leads to social cognition, that your perception, your thought process, your feelings, your decision making, problem solving in a social condition is how, and how can we study it. This finishes with two major points of nature. Now, let's understand that when we talk about it studying feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, it also studies individuals' behavior in social context, which is their feelings and thoughts in a social context. These context refers to influenced by the presence of other people and also by the influence of other people's behavior. Like, let's take an example. You are a part of a working group where you do not like anybody, and at the same time you're a part of a social group in your workplace that you love a lot. Now, don't you feel your behaviors will change, will be obviously changed in the group that you really loved, by the social group where you interact, where you party, or where you are maximally involved? At the same time, observe the group that you do not like, that you're working and targeting your goals and achieving. Remember, your performance will completely be influenced by their behavior. So, the way they treat you, the way they give you work, the way they appreciate you will completely change the way you are going to behave. So, your behaviors are completely dependent on people's presence, social conditions, and also the presence of others. So, this again comes down to the same thing that I mentioned, that the presence of others is implied or imagined presence of others also, which has important effects on individuals. So it's just not something which is implied. Imagine it's the same thing where you think, like, let's take an example, continuing the same example of getting bullied. If you feel people are watching me who bully me, your behaviors are going to change. You are just imagining that people are watching you. So your behaviors will come down to a different direction and a different behavior. So it's a result of a social condition or a social presence of other people. Now, one of the most important aspect after the nature that we finish is we need to understand Kurt Lewin was one of the psychologists who stated has a huge contribution of social psychology. He was a German American psychologist and recognized as the founder of social psychology. So we would not say a father, but a founder of leading to major facts and concepts of social psychology. Now, they mentioned here that psychologists studied and operated on individuals. They interacted and made sure that to understand what causes their behavior, what leads to engaging in specific kind of behaviors. So they came into a conclusion that behaviors are an outproduct of social condition and your attributes. That means how do you behave in an environment will equally be commanded by the social condition that you're a part of and your equal levels of personality. Attribute and individual characteristics are also referred to as personality. I'll give you an example. When we go to a crowded condition and crowded place, like let's take an example, you go to a market, a local market, and it's usually crowded at the time of 6 and 7. That these are peak hours. Evening hours are peak hours for people to come out and buy vegetables or some important, stuff for their house and household. So you go to 6 to 7, o'clock in the evening to these markets, and you feel completely horrible about it. You feel, oh God, this is so terrible. I'm not going to be able to work here. Now, the social condition is making you feel irritated, making you feel agitated and really bothered. Now, your personality is, on the other hand, to manage everything. You're one of those who takes down, calm yourself down, complete your task, and usually with ease and a thoughtful mind, you make sure there is no chaotic situations and you reach to your goal. Here, your goal is what? You need to buy vegetables calmly and move ahead. Now, what is causing a problem? The social context is very crowded. There are thousands of people at the same place. Like nowadays, Diwali Mela and Dashera Melas are there. People whose personality get irritated with a lot of people, they do not go there because they know a social condition like extreme crowdedness, and my personality being very hyper cannot manage it. But this personality is goal oriented, very calm, wants to finish their task and leave the place. So this person moves through the crowd, comes down, completes, take all the vegetable for the household, and gets back. So what? How does your behavior change? Your behavior changed not only because of the social condition, but that social condition made your personality to be adapted and tell you that your behaviors are something which is able to achieve goals. So you need to know your behavior is an outproduct of two major things. One is individual characteristic, which is your personality when interacting with social conditions will change your behavior. So this was Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin was German-American psychologist, one of the really famous psychologists, and his contributions are very high. He researched behaviors and only behaviors in interaction and in context of many social conditions. Now let's come to the scope. When we talk about the nature and characteristic of this part of psychology, we also need to find out, is there any scope? Is there a future of this kind of psychology? Is it really applicable in society? And are we using it and finding it around relatable in your environment? So it is trying to tell you that, is social psychology actually present in the environment? So the first scope that we talk about is so-called social psychology concentrates on individuals' behavior in the social context. So the subject matter of social psychology is interaction of individuals with other individuals in the society as well. So two major part as a scope is, we study everything which comes under the context of you interacting with other individuals or many individuals in a social condition, which could be a society, a cultural value, a norm, or a party. So behavior is social psychology, like the interaction of individual behavior is something which is a core. So we study everything. The scope is, you want to research on social psychology, you pick up any one interaction and study it. So it's quite widespread. The scope is increasing and it's quite widespread. Let's move to the next few scope. People generally express their feeling of disapproval and approval, favorability and unfavorability. Social psychology will study all of this. That why are you liking somebody? Why do you disapprove of some people? Why there's a high sense of dislike for few and high sense of liking for few? Individual differences of all these social conditions, and how are these social conditions are impacting your emotions and thoughts. So let's take an example. When children go out to vacation with their friends, like something which is organized by their college and schools for approximately 4 to 5 days. There are some children who enjoy the social interaction and they learn a lot, favorably come back. And there are some people who enjoy, but there's a sense of emotional, the influence that these trips of 4 days and 5 days made you feel that you miss home. So there is homesickness that strikes the person. Why did it happen? Because of the impact of your friends and you moving, those time of trips when you're not with your parents, that impact, that space and void impacted you and made you emotional. So what did it make you understand? It made you understand a part of your personality, that you are vulnerable. You do miss your parents. There is a high sense of attachment that you hold with them. So it studies everything from approval, from disapproval, favorability, your favorable attitude, favorability of people, situation and condition, likes and dislikes of different people, and also how these favorability and this favorability can change the way you think and behave. Now, social psychology is one of the most emerging field. We have social psychology very much relatable and happening around the society. So social cognition is also one of the most, which we studied in the previous slide, a very important topic of social psychology. Social cognition is how do you perceive, decide, understand, remember, learn, but anything which is related to a social stimuli. It could be people, it could be culture, it could be a ritualistic environment, it could be a group study, your interaction within a group. So social cognition tells you that how do you think, reason, decide, learn, decision make, problem solve in and amongst people, in a situation and amongst a social condition situation, or probably anything that has society norms, society's culture. Now let's move to the next scope that talks about that social psychology and its influence is traditional in nature. The core of the study says that the way people affect the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors is something which is extremely important and our core of study. So the scope lies in that we can study and research on anyone's feelings, anyone's thought, anyone's thinking, reasoning, problem solving, but in a core of a social condition, in a core of highly stimulating social environment. Like at the moment, festivities is one of the most lucrative way of studying social psychology. How people are different in their norms, in their ritual, in their way of understanding one another. So that is a very good scope of social psychology, which is relatable and found your interaction in a ritualistic group, your interaction in a friendly group, and your interaction in a professional group. This all stands out to be understanding your feeling, thoughts, and emotion in a social stimulating environment. Now, coming to the next, social psychology will be interested in answering all the question, which is why people act in a good way and why people act in a not so good way, which is antisocial behaviors, hostile attitude and behavior, and some people being very altruistic, always ready to help other people, always available with other people. Social psychologists dwell into such features maximally, which understands people personality, being very positive, being very adaptable to help other people. So pro-social behavior is what? Pro-social behavior is helping other people without expecting that help back. So I'll give you an example for this. There are some people who are always helping the blinds and the inaudible people, people who are deaf and dumb, walk down the streets, support them on the streets, make sure that they, cross the red lights, they make sure that they provide them something. This is a pro-social behavior. Imagine a person on the road might not catch back on you. You might not see them again. So you are helping somebody without an expectation of getting that help. So the whys of the positive behaviors and the whys and hows of the negative behavior is also studied. Reason why people are antisocial, why there is such a hostile behavior in some individuals and hostile feelings. Where is it coming from, and how does it impact other people and themselves? So this is a negative paradigm that we talk about, and a positive. This is something which is mostly done in social psychology. In today's environment, we have highly antisocial behaviors in society, and that's the reason maximum crimes in our country at the moment are increasing. People are moving towards greed, more hostile behaviors, and pro-social behavior is decreasing. We do not want to help anybody because we are very materialistic. So the reason for this is the traditionality of the country is reducing. That's again a research by social psychologists who states, university states that pro-social behavior decreases when a country works towards economic high levels and the gap between all the strata of our country does not is taken not care of. And we all know poverty in our country is very high. We do not have everything available to poverty-ridden society, citizens. And the people who are very rich are very rich, and the ones who are very poor are very poor. So this void increases antisocialness. The criminal activities, the robberies, theft, and everything in terms of pickpocketing on the streets, thefting people on walking streets increases because of that factor. So social psychologists are highly interested in such factors because this is adding value to our country, adding value to our social and traditional factors of our country. One of the last thing that we need to know and answer is that social psychologists will study most factors which associates to group levels, which is intergroup activities. So where we will understand why groups are formed. It could be any kinds of group. It could be a personal group, a professional group. We would like to understand as social psychologists why groups are formed in a social professional categories. So, for example, when we talk about professional categories, we hardly see people becoming friends in their professional life. When they do it, we understand why. What is the motive? It is increasing their performance or not, or is it adding value? Are they looking forward for promotions in it? So we understand how and why any kind of groups are formed, what can lead to group conflicts in such places. There are high group conflicts not only inside but also outside. So we study intergroup and intragroup. So intra is within, inter is with other group people. So the reason that we study is the riots in our country is a problem of intergroup conflict, which is people from different custom and religion fighting for something which do not have a base. So we study that. We understand that what is leading to riots, what is leading to indiscriminate fighting on the streets. It could be discrimination, it could be stereotype of people being formed. So all of this are the scope of social psychologists. Once we understand the scope, we do relate to the fact that this kind of psychology is extremely associated to our country's society, the way the societies and the features and the different dynamics of our culture functions, and not only understand group structures, but it also understand group processes. What makes it, how are we forming groups in our country? What are leading to the caste and customs in our country? What is maintaining them, and what is leading to fights in them? So this is all which is a scope of social psychologists, highly associated to an interdiscipline which is sociology also. Now let's answer a question that what will social psychologists study? So if, for example, you want to do an expertise in social psychology, you would want to know what is the kind of things that you will study. So, like the image which falls on this PPT, you can understand first individual differences in the social condition is something that you will study first. Then, the process of social interaction among people, what kind of interaction, how they start, and what causes them to facilitate, which is being maintained. That how can we lead to the social interaction positively be maintained through ages or phases of the social condition. Then the relationship between individuals and groups, how individuals behave in a group, what kind of group. We can study different kind of groups around. We can study what makes this group, what makes a conflict in this group. study and the causes of social behaviors. These social behaviors could be anything from pro-social behavior, altruistic behavior, hostile or antisocial behavior. Also, social behavior is studied in a systematic pattern, so it's a scientific study. You can pick up any social behavior like stereotypical attitude, how attitudes are formed. We can study what leads to interpersonal interaction, what leads to antisocial behavior, any kind of behavior in the societal context, which is in the context of the society, can be studied and something which can be taken care of. So, any behavior in the social context is a social behavior. This finishes with the scope and answers the question, what, as a social psychologist, where do you stand? We stand in a platform where we study all interactions between people and groups, and also the social behaviors, their causes and effect. Now, understanding the social psychology started when we need to know what are the backgrounds, historical background, and where did it begin from. Knowing that psychology had many branches, social psychology is one of them. We have developmental, we have biological, neurological. It is equally one of them. So let's understand where did it started from, where were the roots of these psychologists. The earliest group was started. We all know that psychology is coming from the German era. It started in the Second World War. When you all know, we maximally have psychologists by the names also. You will understand. We have German and Euro American psychologists. We do not have Asians and we do not have Africans. Why not Asians? Because psychology came to Asia in 1950s and 60s, whereas it has evolved at around 1904. At the time of First World War, the study did start, and by the Second World War, the Germans took over the world. Maximally Germans were the only psychologists that you had. Sigmund Freud was, a Jew. That's why he was not appreciated and not given a Nobel Prize ever in life. Only by the factor that he had given so much to study in the matter of personality, but did not get the acclaim, so much of critical evaluation because he was a Jew. When we talk about earlier, Kurt Lewin, he was also an American German psychologist. We speak about history. The history also comes from German scholars. There were no Asians. There were only German scholars, which was in 1908, Thiantel and Lazarus, who published a social psychology book containing facts. It was facts, articles regarding a collective mind. Collective mind talks about your behaviors, feelings, and action in a social condition, which we've been repeatedly being studied. By the by the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th, in between the 19th century, there was an evolution of all the branches. So social psychology was not the center of attention. It happened by 20th century. Social psychology systematically started studying the thoughts, feelings, and actions of human beings, not only in alone, but in interaction with other people, in interaction in a group, in a social condition. Then came one of the most important psychologists, which and the school also, who are behaviorists. Behaviorist is John Watson. He published a classic manifesto for psychology in 1903 that talks about behaviors of all the kind. So when behaviors of all the kind, it also studied behaviors of social psychology, which is in social context, in people, with people, without people, all of that. And it happened in 1930. 1924, inspired by Watson, Floyd Olcott published an agenda for social psychology. So, agenda is what this psychology should do. What should be its goal? What should it be its achievements? And what should be the kind of activities and social behaviors that this kind of psychology should study? Just taking in building on Floyd's publicity, published articles, Watson and Alport argued that social psychology would flourish only if it became an experimental science. So remember, you just cannot observe social psychology. You cannot just keep observing people's behavior, their interactions, their stereotypical behavior. Like people say that men are better drivers, women are not. So this is also a social stereotype which is coming to our country. We can also talk about men will always be the breadwinners and women will be caretakers. Today the country is changing. Probably the roles of the women and men are changing in society. We equally find males and women working. So the behaviors of women are also changing. The behaviors of males are also changing. In the pandemic, the males were also, according to WHO, depression is something which is striking even male factors. Whereas depression is only a disease of women, as said from the 1900s. So see now the trends of 20th centuries are completely changing in our society. So why is it all happening? Because it is experimentally being studied. We just don't observe something. Systematic observation cannot make theories. Systematic observations cannot lead down to any sort of functional behaviors that you can apply in the country. So it has to be an experimental science. Moving on to next, the first experiment of social psychology actually started in 1898, which was Norman Tippett's experiment. Norman's experiment has been very famous. He studied that how people can put more effort in a task, and whereas the other people present actually as observers and competitors. This is something which is called social inhibition in a simple way. They are trying to say, let's take an example, you make a PPT or a PowerPoint presentation for your class, and there are 10 people in that group. You will understand out of the 10, only 5 are working and 5 are spectators of the group. That means not equal contribution of all 10 will come. The 5 will put up the work, they will devise the PPT, and the rest 5 will enjoy being the part of the group. So what is happening? The presence of other people is listing down lesser effort from all individuals. So some people only stay in the group as competitors and observers, which is they are just being a part, observing the efforts of others. They come, do their role without any input, are something which is Norman Treplit's first experiment. It's also called social inhibition, that how with the number of people the effort in the task decreases. So that's why a group of 4 and 3 is better than a group of 10 and 15. If you have a group of 10 and 15, remember there is social inhibition which is happening. Now let's move to further. After the 20th century, the foundational years started in 1940s and 50s, which is before 20th century. 20th century was our expansion years. So Kurt Lewin again and Leon Fistinger, one of the very important psychologists, they were rigorously studying, social conditions in society scientifically. So they were conducting experiment, they were conducting observations and statistically devising it to create a theory for it. They are also called, Kurt Lewin, as I said, was also called the founder of social psychology. Sometimes the father of social psychology also. Like Sigmund Freud is called the father of analytical psychology, so is Kurt Lewin. He developed very important ideas about the discipline, focused on the dynamic interactions of individuals, identified individual differences among people in different societal contexts, like how people behave in a professional office, with their friends, with their parents, with a stranger, with an acquaintance, and with a partner. So these all are dynamic interaction, which was rigorously studied by Kurt Lewin and Leon Festingers in 1940s to give us theories, to give us something which was solid base of this psychology. Now during the World War II, there were a lot of because World War II was also associated with the same thing. Conformity was studied at this point of time. So conformity suggested, why do we say yeses to people despite understanding our role in the in a group? So you might be saying there are some children in the group who agree to the ideas and don't say anything. So if the first two popular children have said that they are going to work in a systematic order and everyone will get a role and responsibility, the ones who do not have a very strong self-esteem will confirm, which is agree to the ideas of others and do not have an opinion of their own. These experiments were conducted by Solomon Ash and also in Muzaffar Sharif in 1937. 37, half the experiment was conducted, and Solomon Ash completed that experiment in a very modified way and a modern way in 1952. Expansion of social psychology started in 1968. There were John and Lalton experiments that were done. Now a complete experiment was done to explain the context of people, not only in a condition where they need help, but when they talk about when they do not need help of others. So Lalton and Dale studied that the helping behaviors, the helping nature of other people, and how this helping behavior changes in the presence of others and in the absence of others. Then Leonard Berkowitz in 1962, again forming the formational and expansion time of social psychologists, studied human aggression. Human aggression was studied very vastly, telling that what leads to aggression, is it the presence of other people, the pressure of other people, the absence of other people, or it's an internal process. By the 20th century, psychology of social conditions increased at a greater field. We started studying attitudes, behaviors. How can attitude change your behaviors and your cognitive process, which is thinking, reasoning, problem solving, decision making in a social context. By the late 20th century, advances in the information of technology came in. Like we had media to social psychology. Now these media added to understand that how can television, how can anything coming on the television impact your mind. So the fact, a lot of customs which are developed, a lot of stereotypical thoughts that are developed in the minds of other people, it's because of the media. the information that comes from the news. Like a lot of people end up saying that one part of the city is very unsafe. Why? Because it has been magnified by the media. It might not be like that. It might be a safer place also at some point of time. But the fact that the media has glorified it, it leads to something which is a condition of social psychology and changes in your cognition. You think, reason, and facilitate your understanding on the basis of that. This was done by Fiske and Taylor, which was a very recent thing. It was done in 2005 to 2008. So these are advances which came in 20th century of social psychology. Now at the 21st century, what is this psychology doing to us? It is impacting all social conditions. It is studying health in a social condition. Like pandemic COVID was a huge example of social psychology, understanding how health conditions can deteriorate and probably increase in the presence of the condition and immunities of the culture. So there were some people who, because of their cultural values, their understanding of the families, having doctors in the family, did not go to the hospital during pandemic, like COVID infections. Despite the infections were really bad, they stayed home, made sure that they take all the support and help, and then they heal in the house. Similar when there are people in the family which have multiple doctors and they're very used to being a part of a system which is, hospitals, they made sure that their people and their family mates were pushed to the hospitals in the need of the hour. So this is understanding your behaviors or thoughts and feelings, which is a social condition in the help, like in the context of probably the customs, the social environment that you're a part of. Also, the way you feel happy and sad also is something which was studied in 21st century. Today, our happiness is mostly in 21st century. Teenagers, adults have their happiness in objects, not in people and not in themselves. They become happy because they have multiple people around. They are happy because they have multiple commodities of luxuries around. So this is happening because of the change of the century and the social condition. The condition states, the environment states, if you have everything, you are happy. So similarly, sadness, absence of other people tells you that you are sad. No. We've always studied in a traditional life, happiness and sadness comes from within. It is dwelling from within. So all these behavior, all these understanding of self was also studied in the 21st century. That's why today, self researches in abnormal psychology are greatly impacted by social psychology. So social psychologists are helping abnormal psychologists to study why anxiety is happening so much in the 21st century to children. How can we reduce it? What is going wrong? And at the same time, remember this, all the social interaction is also equally impacted by your brain condition, which is your biological body. Now, moving to what is social psychology doing in India? What is the scope of this, psychology in India, and where does it stand today? We need to know in 1928, N. Sen Gupta gave us a book entitled called Introduction to Social Psychology. It's a very glorified and amazing book given by him. He was also the first chairman of the first department of psychology that we've studied in evolution, Calcutta University. He's been the first chairman of that department, and it started with experimental psychology. Even in India, in the University of Calcutta, the first lab that was formed was of the experimental psychology. And there are many eminent psychologists in terms of Radha Kamal Mukherjee, which are also a part of Calcutta University in the latest year, which was we go back to 2000s, 2005 and 10. Indian psychologists are working, social psychologists are working in prejudices, stereotypes, and social attitudes, and large scales of surveys were conducted. So we are studying attitudes of people, we are studying how stereotypes are formed in our society, how social behavior keeps changing because the environment keeps changing. We have understood in the pandemic times also how did our behavior changed. How did we become so sensitive to other people's needs? Because we realize everything is momentary. So all of these things have been large amount of surveys have been conducted, and various attitudes of people have been researched lately in the conditions of Indian context. And in the Indian context, in the Indian society, with Indian traditional, conventional rituals and customs. This finishes with the historical understanding of where did social psychology start in India and even in the outside world. What was the origin of this psychology that we study? Let's understand another thing, that social psychology is an interdisciplinary approach. So when I say interdisciplinary, it means it's all interconnected. When you see my slides, there are bonds that are connected. The reason is social psychology cannot work in the absence of other subjects in our society. So let's start with the relationship of social psychology and anthropology. What is anthropology? Anthropology is the study of human culture. So they are way too connected. When we talk about social psychology, it is interconnected to your behavior, thoughts, and feelings in the social conditions, in the social environment, and human culture is a huge part that builds your values, your belief systems, your practices with other people. So anthropology and social psychology is way too interconnected. It's like studying one another. Both of them have a high impact. Obviously, human culture impacts your thoughts, feeling, and action, and social psychology, which is the practices, the interconnected practices. Researchers tell you that how is your belief system changed because of these practices. Now, social psychology and economics. The field of economics deals with the production of trends, the production of economy, distribution of goods in our country. Remember, at one point of time, bank accounts were rare. Today, we have token economies. Today, we have cryptocurrencies which are coming to the country. Why? Because of the way people are producing goods, how it is changing the mindset of the country's high economical industrialists, how they distribute that economical thought of cryptocurrency in our country, and how it is consumed by the generation. And we all know Generation Z is very fascinated by cryptocurrency. They find cryptocurrency is a very huge, and obviously it's way too expensive and equally giving you a lot of benefits because of the kind of social condition. So economics has a huger impact on the way we start dealing and understanding our social economical behavior, which impacts salary. So the better that you understand these consumption and distribution, the better that you will invest in the society. This equally diverts the social psychology's interest, and they work on people in social economical condition. So that's how the two are very interconnected. Now, social psychology and political science, we all know political science is a study of political organization, which is a huge part of our country. We are governed by governments and political parties. So social psychologist talks about understanding political behaviors, like who do you vote, how do you vote, and why do you vote. And in some countries, why vote? Sorry, some cities, why in some cities, voting behavior doesn't matter. 50% of people are not voting, and in some parts of the city, voting is seen as an essential part because they feel that identification of a party, having a role model, values associated to a political party, will make changes in your voting behavior. And this voting behavior will give you what? It will give you the kind of social conditions and behaviors that you needed in the country. So that's how the two are interconnected. The more that you understand the voting behavior, the better that you vote. The better that you vote, better is the kind of government that you get for yourself. And that is completely a government changes the way you think, behave, and feel about the people around. The customs, the caste system usually comes from political parties, I feel. There are so much of rights, it is actually instigated in us. They tell us what is right and wrong and we behave accordingly. That's how your social behaviors changes towards people to people, because a political organization tells you that what is correct and what is incorrect. Then we come down to social psychology and sociology. Sociology is extremely interconnected to societies. Sociology is what? It's the study of societies. It's the study of different societies in our country and how they indulge behaviors, interpersonal behaviors. How do we form groups on the basis of these societies? And although psychologists and social psychologists both are interested in the same thing, they are interested in how do we behave in a society, how do we focus differently in a social group, and study our thoughts, feelings, and action. Social psychologists have also started focusing on group entity as a single unit, like studying groups separately, why groups are formed, how groups are formed, how can we make changes in a group system, and how that group system can impact its member. This is similarly a society. Group can be taken as a society. Society has what? It has a culture, it has a language, it has people who are connected by this culture and language. So like one of the most important example that I feel because of this Shara is, Bengalis have their own culture and they have their own single unit group. Why? They have a common behavior, they have a common feeling, they have a common action oriented behavior towards their, alignment with one another. They function equally together. Their behaviors are governed with the way the entire community functions. So this is a group and a society also, because they have their own language. Bengalis have their own language. They have their own customs. They have their own huge of festivities that elaborately, study and celebrate in the country. So that's how social psychology and sociology is highly interconnected. They're almost the same. The other cannot exist without the other, so they're very complementary. Now, moving down to our last few things. Social psychology is greatly influenced by biological psychology also. How? Why is body biology associated to society? See, the way your bodily functions, your brain activity works, and hormonal activity works, they change the way you behave, and that changes the societal construct. So let's take an example. In today's time, the teenagers are way too concerned with the way they want to look. They want to look pretty, they want to look acceptable, they just want to look good. This has increased the amount of social media influences on all the medias. I feel children being stuck to videos of Instagrammers and social influencer. Why? Because they feel the fame comes with the way you look and the way you talk. It's not that. It's only a mode of career which we have in our country. So this is how hormonal changes at the time of teenagers, which influences your body and body structure, where you just want to look good, you just want to feel good, and you feel that it's only good looking people are the ones who get everything, and they curse themselves of not having the exact body shape and type. So that's how biological science completely changed the customs and the social environment that you stay in, and this you change the values of the same place also. So biological or physiological science actually is connected to neurological science also. Neurological science is the science of brain, which is neurotransmitters, which focuses that what happens in the brain and nervous system and other aspects of the body and mind, and how that body mind changes impacts the environment and society. Now, few more other disciplines that I've mentioned, because they're holistic disciplines, so I've just mentioned them separately and then I'll explain you in a holistic manner. Social psychology, when we talk about, remember, studies social conditions also in the influence of clinical psychology. Clinical psychology studies abnormal behavior, and social psychology studies normal behavior. This helps us understand that how abnormal behavior is cultivated from a normal behavior, and how abnormal behavior can be corrected and got down to square one, which is your normality. Then social psychology and developmental psychology is highly associated. Developmental psychology talks about your development at each stages of life, and social development is a huge part of it. So making social friends, being a part of a social group, they are all a part of developmental science. So let's take an example: a small little child who's 5-year old just started going to schools, and they do not have correct social interaction, but like they're a little muted, they do not talk much. Remember, this will impact their social condition, which is other children are making friends and this little kid cannot make friends because its developmental milestones are missing. He or she is not being able to make friends, is not it's not that what do you understand in terms of not equipped with the milestone of social development, do not interact with other people, do not understand the interaction of other people. What will happen as social conditions? That social condition will overpower the child, change its behavior, thoughts, and feelings. Might make the child feel inferior, or might make the child feel segregated. Similarly, it can happen with a superior child. Superior child might change the entire social condition and forms norm in that particular situation. So see how the development of child being so superior can change an entire custom, a culture. Now, coming to social psychology and personality psychology, personality greatly influences social psychology. We've already studied this. According to Kurt Lewin, behavior is an outproduct of personality and social conditions. So, the way you have your social condition impacts your personality, and the way your personality is strong, you impact your social condition. So, that's how these two things are interconnected. You can check the images. These are the first maximally most important four disciplines which are closely interconnected with social science, which is sociology, cognitive psychology, because we are studying thinking, reasoning, problem solving, clinical psychology, and personality psychology. This suggests us that psychology is an interdisciplinary approach. Now let's come to a level of analysis of social behavior. At what all level we should, as social psychology, are studying social behavior. So there are different levels. So as the bricks that have been formed in the PPT tells you, a different level. Let's start with the first one. The first level of social behavior is inter and intrapersonal. So we understand a person's behavior. Let's take a person A's behavior fundamentally in a social condition. So how do they interact in a social condition? This is highly impacted by the way we are. So your inter and intrapersonal level will be a complete construction of you. How do you interact with the person A and how do you interact with yourself? Is both. It's impacted by other people's behavior, thoughts, and feelings around you, and also it's biologically inherited. How it is biologically inherited? It biologically inherited in a way that when we talk about some people having family members who are very aggressive, remember the children also tend to be very aggressive. That is inherited. So inheritance says that children tend to show a lot of aggressive behavior. They overpower other people. So when you start overpowering other people, what happens? You start becoming very bossy. So you start changing the social context because of your aggression. So the others under you will be impacted by your thoughts, feelings, and action. So your interpersonal is so strong that you make changes in other people's thought and feelings and behaviors. So that is both commanded by environment and heredity. Next level, that is called the interpersonal interaction, which is impacted by other ways, which is it is not only impacted by inheritance but also impacted by the understanding of the social world around you. So this simply suggests that interpersonal simply suggests that we are greatly impacted by what is happening in society around us. So the kind of custom that you stay in, the kind of families that you stay in, the kind of social world that you stay in actually changes your thoughts, feelings, and action. So if a child is grown up in a house which is very strict, has very high parental values, moralistic behavior, they will not do anything. No social behavior. The way they think, feel, and behave will be an outproductivity of their family, not the environment. At the same time, there are some behaviors and feelings and thoughts and actions which are built because of the environment, built because of the world, because the world has given a stereotypical behavior, a stereotypical attitude which is coming from the country. So we take it. Like the riots are a result of this because we are getting from the country that this is something you should not be accepting from other culture, this is something that you should not be appreciating of other culture. So what do we start doing? We start fighting. Our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors of that custom changes towards them. We start ignoring them. Discrimination starts happening. That's how discrimination in our country is so prevalent because of this interpersonal interaction, which is greatly impacted by, influenced by the social world around you. Now coming to the last, interaction within the group systems and with individual. So social behavior in a social psychology is also impacted by groups. Groups as in the kind of group that you're a part of. Simple example. Children, if are a part of a very intelligent group and a very intelligent peers, they will have a better, academic performance. So, parents say a peer pressure has completely spoiled my child. The reason is they made friends which are not intelligent. They made friends who are not scoring well. So your child also starts, devoting their time in wrong activities or probably activities which is a waste of time. Why? Because of the interaction within a group has impacted individual members' feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, which is very correct. Ever imagine that you go to a new country? Let's take an example. After you finish your graduation, you move to a new country that you have. So when you move to a new country, don't you adapt to their culture, their thought process, and their feelings? So, aren't the entire group interaction making changes and influencing your behaviors? So, your behaviors are an outproduct of three major things, remember. It is an outproduct of the fact that biological inheritance, it could be because it's coming from the parents. Let's take an example. If the parents are very shy, parents are very introverted, the child might have a social behavior which is similar in nature. The child might not interact with other friends. The child might not be so gregarious because the parents have not provided them the opportunity to be the same. So it is biologically inherited. Second, interpersonal interaction is greatly impacted by the social world. Social world is probably a social scenario that could be the belief systems of the culture of the society that you're a part of, belief system of a social construct that you've recently become a part of. That's why your behavior changes greatly when you go to college because there's a huge impact of your friend, on the social environment of the college that you're a part of. So if your college is very very research oriented in psychology, your entire mind will move towards researching, pilot studying, human minds and behaviors and their processes and mental processes. The last one that we talk about is interaction between individuals and group. So your social behavior is also manifested by the kind of group that you're a part of, the kind of membership of a group that you have. So better the group, better is your interpersonal interaction. More is going to be the conformity. So this is a result of conformity. You work according to your group members. So the simple example, whenever you go to a party, you have a dress code. Imagine if you don't go according to the dress code, you would be discriminated and left aside. This is how group functions happen. if you do not conform to the group norms, the rules which have been established in the group norm, you would be someone who would be probably discriminated. And if you adjust with it, you are a part, your social interaction is because of the group that you're a part of. So that completes that how does social behavior gets analyzed and moves. Remember, it is an individual interaction and also something which is a group interaction. Starting from what we studied today, we studied what is social psychology, something which is prevalently increasing in our country being a 21st century, its nature, which involves what are the characteristics. We studied the scope. Scope to make you understand that is there any chance of studying and watching these kinds of behaviors of social psychology in the environment? Yes, we do see each other every day changing our behaviors, the way we feel, the way we think, the way we understand other people in relationship to the other people and in relationship to the social construct that you're a part of. So that is the scope. Post the scope, we understand that social psychology is not alone. It functions with other disciplines. One of the four more important disciplines that I told you in the last slide was personality psychology. Cognitive is extremely important. It talks about your thinking, reasoning, problem solving, decision making, personality, attention, everything changing according and because of the group. So, because that your group is something, you might change your personality completely because of that. Developmental psychology, sociology, which is a huge part of social psychology. When we talk about social psychology, which is society studying psychology, sociology studies of societies. So see how they both are similar. Then we talk about clinical psychology. Clinical psychology highlights abnormal behavior. Social psychology highlights normal behavior according to the custom rules and a society. So remember, normal behavior can be different to society to society. So what is normal for a Delhiite would be very different from a person who's staying in West Bengal or Rajasthan or Andhra Pradesh. Why? Cultures are differentiating according to the cultural groups and the society that you are a part of. So this tells us and talks about that social psychology is an interdisciplinary approach. It cannot function without other disciplines. You would need a political understanding. You would need economical understanding, which impacts your economical behavior, and political behavior impacts your voting behavior, impacts your influences, and obviously biological psychology also, because the mind also comprises of the brain, which is the functionality of the brain. So your hormones, your neurotransmitters impacts the way you behave, impacts the way you construct a social world. And the last that we did was analysis of social behavior, which is social behavior is manifested in three ways. First is in the individual and interaction level happens is impacted by the biological inheritance. So social behavior is an outproduct of inheritance, which is it can be because of your parents, because of your family mates. Second, interpersonal interaction is manifested by the social world, which is very true. It is a result of the social world. It is a result of the world that you're staying in, the country, the custom that you're staying in. And the last is the interaction between individuals and groups are manifested by something which is group interactions. More the number of groups, more the kind of social behaviors that you exhibit in the environment. Now, to understand and finalizing with the definition of social psychology, remember social psychology is the study of thinking, behaviors, and thought, reason, and feeling that you have, which is your thinking, reasoning, problem solving in a social context. So, it is studied in a social context through scientific methods of your time. So, it is a scientific psychology and a scientific study that you have. Hope the analysis was good. Interaction, always remember, as I quoted last, between groups and another psychology is an impact of social activities in a group system. So why groups changes your behavior? Because of the structure, because of the activities which are happening in the group. So remember, your family can change you, your friend group can change you, your work professional group can change you. It can make you hostile, it can make you friendly, it can make you cooperative, and it can make you an antisocial person also. If you have bad friends, they can make you antisocial. And if you have good friends, you can become way too intelligent in terms of performance and other things. This finishes with today's introduction of social psychology. Hope you all understood. Thank you, everyone.